of understanding and needing to integrate multiple SDKs in order to track that. You need to have a one-stop shop, one platform that gives you access to all that information in real time and makes you focus on driving those users and not having your tech team or engineering team having to do one integration after the other to try and keep up, which is impossible.
Okay.
I think on the buy side, it's a little bit about efficiency too. I say this a lot, but in a perfect world, we really would have perfect information, and we'd be able to act on that immediately and efficiently. And so I think that when we're able to actually use tracking to segment things up and bucket them out as granular as we possibly can get, that's really where you get the value in a tracking platform, where you're able to leverage that information to make the most informed decisions possible.
Okay, great. So fraud, what is fraud? This is what we want to get into. We've got an idea of how we're going to use the data and the tracking. I want to go down the line, have you guys tell me, in your day-to-day, what do you think of when you hear the word fraud? What is it? What does that mean to you in the context of mobile marketing?
My definition of fraud is anything that's outside of the contractual obligations of us in our marketing party.
Oh, my definition is definitely more practical. For me, there's a lot of, the contracts are really different between all the different parties and how they attribute where your traffic is coming from and how you pay them. But at the end of the day, I'm in charge of trying to get my app installed and grow our user base. And so fraud is basically any time that I get a user who isn't actually a real user, who can't play the game, isn't a real human being, and isn't monetizing. So, and a lot of you guys here don't do user acquisition, but if you don't know, something out there around 10 to 20% of all the traffic that's going into installs to your app are not real human beings.
It's going to be hard to top that one. I think that fraud could be actually created by a lot of human beings, whether it's by automated platform or people sitting in a real farm installing an app or installing a game, which makes it harder and harder to track and analyze and catch in real time. Because these guys get more and more advanced, but definitely giving you access to users that were not the core target for that.
So I think as an advertiser today, you've either had cases where you've actually encountered fraud, or it's happened to you and you just don't know it. So it's happening to everyone. The way we look at it, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's actual fraud, or you're paying for non-incent and you're getting incentivized traffic, or you're getting non-incentivized traffic which just isn't converting and really low quality. Those are all similar. The way to deal with it is just do downstream, use tracking, and really figure out what's converting, what's not, where you're getting ROI, whether it's fraud or not. You just have to focus and put your budget on where you're getting ROI.
Okay, so I think something that is sort of common here, something that comes out of that is not real users. The thing I think of, certainly contractually, right? If you sign a contract with an ad network, or conversely, if you're a network, the contract you sign, you've got specific terms that you're trying to meet. So the not real users, certainly a big issue. In my mind, fraud comes down to intention, right? We certainly get people out there, no matter what site you're on, who aren't doing things on purpose, but it's a complex industry. There's multiple sub-publishers underneath publishers and traffic that gets resold. Really though, there's things that come into play, like bots and incentivized traffic, people trying to manipulate various KPIs and whatnot. And that's the issue that I think we really want to dive into and focus on is how do we avoid some of that stuff, and how do we figure out that that's actually happening. So the first thing we talked about when we had a call before this, the first thing that kind of came to mind is we have to recognize, sort of as an industry, this is happening, right? There is fraud out there, and a lot of people don't recognize that and don't realize that. So I guess my question to you guys is, why do you think that's the case? Is there some sort of reason behind the fact that this is still happening?
I mean, it's not a sexy subject by any means. You can see some blank stares out in the audience, and I think the thing that people don't realize is just how rampant this is. You might think, hey, fraud doesn't really have an impact on me. Sure, it happens, but it's baked into the cost.
Not to me.
Right, right? No, the other guys. But when you actually dig into the data, this is a much bigger problem than I think anyone's willing to recognize. And the numbers that I'm seeing on our side with, let's say non-incent CPI networks in particular, and I know I've heard similar things in the industry. We're looking at 30 to 50% fraudulent traffic. So take your ROI, double it. If you get rid of your fraud, that's what you can do. So this is definitely something that we should be talking about, and I think it's on all of us to continue to move the industry forward and to work with the networks and to work with the different partners to say, look, this isn't the way things need to be done. Let's go out there and figure out a solution.
Why do you think that's still happening? Why are people not paying attention to it?
Well, first of all, it's a lot of money. So the amount of brain power, time, and effort put into fleecing you of your money is quite substantial. So you can get a group of pretty smart developers in some country other than the US, you can get 10, 15 of them who are completely dedicated to basically arbitraging, what you're getting from someone who's advertising and making money for yourself. So, I think what might be helpful is just to more describe, what the common fraud techniques are. So I'll start with one. So one of the most common is basically to have some bots basically go and install the app through an algorithm and actually play your game, register your game, and actually make some deposits. So what's very interesting is that they're relatively sophisticated, and our industry is relatively transparent from a sort of sharing information standpoint, because we have solutions out there like Flurry, Mixpanel, Google Analytics. So basically everyone knows that you're looking at day 1, day 7 retention. And so they specifically write algorithms that make sure they log in on those dates and make deposits within those time frames. And basically what happens is that, a percentage of that is, not real traffic and can change the metrics that you vote on. Why it's so rampant is because a lot of networks don't even know what's happening to them. And they don't have any ability to actually detect it themselves, because a lot of marketers don't share downstream click information. And so for them to reconcile what a real customer is and where you source them from, they just don't have the data to put the dots together. So
Perfect lead in for?
I think data is the solution here. Data and innovation, the combination of both, because what happens here is, fraud is, is happening with credit cards, it's happening with, every field of our lives, and this is no different. And the incentive here is even more powerful because it's immediate and they can arbitrage and play around with that until they get caught. It's about collecting data, and this industry, a couple of years ago, no one ever dreamed of downstream events and tracking all those parameters, and now you're tracking a lot of additional information, post-install information, and it's our goal as or target as an industry as part of the ecosystem to outpace their level of innovation and keep on getting deeper and deeper and making their lives harder and trying to make that happen. There's no silver bullet here. It's just a matter of building the right processes and finding that bad apple, getting rid of it. There's going to come another one, but you need to be prepared for it. And the less data you collect, the less you're geared toward dealing with that.
Yeah, basically, if there's no transparency in the source of your traffic and you can't track it back, then you're basically setting yourself up for a lot of fraud. So the second more common way of fraud, just to sort of get to that, is basically when you pay for a non-instant traffic, where you think that you're getting people who are genuinely interested in what you have to offer as a product. A lot of times, behind the curtain, that non-instant traffic is actually incentivized. So people are actually giving those users some incentive. They have no desire to use your product at all, except to fulfill this incentive of some sort. And so you think you're getting sort of highly qualified, relevant traffic who's sought you out, but instead you're just getting people who are clipping coupons, getting incentive, maybe playing your game. They sometimes get instructions to do a couple things so they fit the profile of your user, and they actually have no intent to do that at all.
Sure. So I know we don't have anyone specifically from an ad network here, but I know some of you guys have dealt with being on the publishing side, and I know, Matan, you can certainly speak to that. What do publishers and ad networks need to do to kind of make sure that they have a good name for themselves and not be seen as someone who does that? Obviously, the data can talk for itself, but how do you guys?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I mean, again, it comes back to data and tracking. We're integrated with all the leading tracking platforms. We've had some experiences with some lesser known, lower tier or self-built tracking platforms, and had some issues there. So we're always trying to work with the leading players and have our clients integrate with one of the leading solutions so that we get quality tracking. And then the second thing is always doing our own tracking as much as we can. Where possible, on Android, for example, we're pretty much tracking the whole funnel ourselves, and then we're always able to compare. So it's we're getting paid based on conversions tracked by AppsFlyer and others, but we're always able to compare it with our own data, and there's always discrepancies, but if it's 90% ratio, then that makes sense. If it's 30%, not so much, and we're able to stop it fairly quickly and prevent it from going on.
So really knowing and understanding a traffic source is a big deal.
Traffic source, yeah, I mean, as an advertiser now, we're always trying to get as much transparency as we can. I think the more you know where your ads are actually running, whether it's working directly with publishers, what media it is, or through networks where you have more control, sub-IDs and so on, you have more control of it, and you're less exposed to fraud. And even if it happens, you're able to block a specific channel. So.
Okay. Wanted to try and dive in a little bit to maybe some specific examples you guys have seen throughout your time working this stuff. I know, Kurt, you had something that you wanted to talk about in an instance you've seen.
Yeah, just chatting about kind of how we go about catching this stuff and walking through it. So YuChiang talked about the kind of three major different types of fraud that we're seeing in the market. So one is just bots, where it's not real traffic at all. Two is incentivized as non-incent, and then three is kind of the more sophisticated bot side that you're talking about. Of you actually see some downstream metrics. So we're a startup, and so what we do is we use MAT, and then we pull everything into an Excel file, basically put it in a pivot table, and we separate everything out by sub-publisher for our different partners. And then we'll evaluate retention and ROI metrics like day 2 retention, 7-day ROI, and then things like that. Those are kind of the two early indicators that we leverage to get a feel for what our traffic is looking like. And as you see enough traffic come through and enough campaigns come through, you get a very good feel for what a particular traffic source should look like. So for our top quality non-incent with the players that we knew or we're pretty comfortable with, like Facebook, like an AdWords, something like that, we're seeing about 40% D2 and about 5 to 10% D3 ROI, let's say. When we did every month we go back through, we do our fraud analysis, we pull all that data, and what we're seeing from these non-incentivized partners is some sub-publishers that have what fits into a very different pattern. So you have the ones where it definitely matches up with our quality non-incent and organic sources. The ROI and D2 match up pretty spot on. And then we see some things where there's absolutely no usage downstream, which means either bots or some failure in the tracking mechanism, although that would, I think, be a little bit odd given that everything else is working properly. So that's the easy stuff to cut out right there, right? So we see that it's got absolutely no downstream usage. Go back and say, guys, look, like this just wasn't real. We can't pay for this. Talk about SubHub, but we need to remove that from the invoice. And the networks are great about this. I don't think that anything's necessarily malicious out there. I think from the sub-publisher side there could be some underhanded dealings, but I think for the most part, people are trying to do what they can to fix this. So all of our partners have been really responsive in helping with this. And on the same side, we want to be a good partner too. So we don't want to unnecessarily say this was fraud, or we think this was, we don't want to pay for this if it was legitimate traffic. So that's when you get into the gray area and have to do a little bit more extrapolating. So the second stage is incent. Our incent numbers, you're looking at probably 3 to 5% day 2 retention with very limited ROI. And so when we see sub-hubs that have those metrics, it's like, okay, that's pretty easy to tell what happened there. Same situation, go back to the networks. Great, they're good about it, they take care of it. Sometimes they blacklist the publishers depending on the situation. But the third and complicated part is really in this, the bot side. And that's where things are getting a little bit scary here. And I think it's why we need to be talking about this, is because fraud continues to get more sophisticated in the mobile space. Now that bots just straight up aren't working anymore, now that people are tracking downstream metrics and actually see, incentivize, and can say this is not quality traffic that we agreed upon, these people out there are getting a little bit smarter, and they're able to simulate day 2, they're able to simulate, they actually make real purchases. I know that there are some companies that actually have actual Google Play accounts, millions of them, that they can go do whatever they want and make it look real. And so that's a little scary because it's a lot tougher to track when you're just looking at a spreadsheet and numbers, because those can be faked. And what we found was that the numbers were matching up really well with what we would see from non-incent. Everything looked good. This is a great source. We're really excited. And let's say we have about 300 users. All of a sudden, after 3 to 5 days, just nothing. They disappear entirely. And so I think that's something that we're just going to continue to have to look out for and stay ahead of. For the other two sides, it's obviously much easier. And of course, the final side is you do want statistical significance. If we got 10 installs from a partner and there was, nobody came back day 2, that's not sufficient to say, hey, this wasn't warranted. So we also put a little bit of probably a 50 install minimum on that, depending on how skewed the data is. But that's more or less how we walk through it. It's not perfect. Really, ideally, we would have a platform that was able to do this for us instantaneously or very quickly. I know Zen Marketing can do it in about 48 hours. I don't know if any of the trackers or those guys at MAT or anyone has that just yet, but I think that these are things that we're going to really see become more prevalent as people start to realize just what's happening out there. And it's certainly going to help everybody's marketing budgets be more efficient.
Yeah, the key is having third-party tracking. So, if you marry that up with a baseline of your own data, and you marry that up with not prepaying, then you're protected mostly. I think your worst enemy is really time. So if you don't have time to sort of understand if your traffic from the source is matching up with your baseline or not, and you do need to look past 7-day window, that's just not enough. So if you're paying, for example, rough numbers, $5 per install, even if it's your kick-ass app, you're not going to recover that $5, probably for at least 30 days. So in that time period, you're opening yourself up if you basically prepay or pay before that time period, before you can really validate that traffic, because the first 2 and 7 days really are pretty easy to spoof. So you really need third-party tracking so you can go back and say, hey, this is verified by a party that really has no interest in this argument between the marketer and the publishers. And then you also need to get your payment terms.
Okay. Anything to add, guys?
So another thing we've seen, besides the clear-cut cases where it's completely bots or completely incentivized, is those cases where it's a little bit harder to really check, where you get 10, 20, 30% incent when you're paying for non-incent, obviously, and then it kind of averages out, so it's less clear-cut, but you get a mix, and it takes longer usually for this to surface. So if you have the ability to actually look at downstream able to see if some of those users look suspiciously similar to incentivized users, then you can see that you're getting a mix there and kind of have to fight that.
Okay. So, sort of a, I guess, a recap. So we understand that fraud is happening, right? We know that's happening. The first and most important step, obviously, we've said, have your data, have tracking, understand the data, look at it, analyze the data. But really, what next, right? You see the data, you see something looks funny. How do you prove to somebody that you're working with, a partner you're working with, that you think this is happening? And it sounds like we've already had a few of you guys say that, for the most part, networks and partners have been responsive. If you see something like this happen, they're willing to work with you. But have you guys had any specific examples where you've gone and talked to partners and said, this isn't working out, what do we do? How do we get past this?
Yeah, actually, my marketing just had a conversation today with our network. So it happens frequently. Basically, we only work with networks that basically give us down to the sub-publisher level of information. Because within a given publisher, who they have in their network and where your ads are showing up rotate really dynamically. So just because one network is working fine doesn't mean that tomorrow they're going to be working fine. So what we did is we isolated down to a very specific sub-publisher. We took third-party tracking information, married it up with some of our information as their activity downstream. We give them a little report that pretty much standardized now. We go, hey, we think this is what's happening, and by the way, this is what a third party says, and then we nicely request that they don't bill us for that. So
there you go, that was my next question.
So our trick is maybe a little aggressive, but whenever we think something's going on and we're not hearing back, or the network isn't really looking into it like we expect them to, just pause the campaign, and that usually triggers them to dig deeper.
I think we're looking at kind of two different things here. So one is the obvious stuff is never really an issue, unless you prepay, in which case that can make things a little bit more difficult. But the obvious stuff, they're pretty good at giving back. When you get into that gray area where it's like, are they bots that are doing things downstream? Are they? Is it a mix of incent, non-incent coming through the same subpub? I think that's one where it more falls under your optimization strategy versus your fraud, because I just don't know if there's enough clear data to say, hey, this is definitely fraud or not. And in the interest of being a good partner, especially when we're going back and saying like 30% of this is blatant fraud, I think on our side, we lean towards just saying, let's definitely pause that subpub. We want to blacklist them permanently, and you can do that with a lot of networks and partners as well. So I think we fall into two categories here. One is actually going after the fraud, and two is just trying to do whatever you can to protect yourself against things that aren't working, which may or may not be fraud. But it's just very difficult to statistically say one way or another with confidence.
Sure. And then on the inverse side, for you guys who are actually sort of on the publisher side, how do you handle those conversations when advertisers come to you guys, or have you had those scenarios? Hopefully not. But
We've never had that because we're running everything on our own medium, so there's no way there's going to be any fraud unless we're doing it. And it's actually been working well for us as an advertiser. We're looking for quality publishers we can work with directly, and then again, unless they're doing the fraud, we're fine. So that's been working well for us on the advertising side.
And Assaf, are you guys, as sort of the partner in the middle, in between all of this, are you guys, or are you aware of your competitors in the space? Are people working on tools to try to help prevent this, automate some of this?
I haven't seen some tools that are kind of native app oriented. The ad tech space, desktop web has a few tools that kind of are targeted towards that. I haven't seen something that's pure native mobile that I know of. If there's anyone out there, feel free to reach out. There's like some good leads for you guys to my left here.
There's a lot of automation on the fraud side, definitely. There's a lot of work.
Exactly. So that's, I mean, that's obviously a big point, right? That's what we're seeing here is that just like hackers out in the world, it's hard to keep one step ahead, right? They see a big payday, quick, easy. They're smart. So we got to try to stay one step ahead. Did you guys have any?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't always have to be this way. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Like there's always going to be some fraud because there's money to be made and there's going to be people doing it. But you know, what's interesting about my business and some other people I used to do UA for is that once you get to a very mature title and you can work with mature networks, you can flip basically the business economics around a bit. So it's very similar to the way that advertising, you know, is built, bought on the web, where they basically promise you and you can agree upon, you know, what the CPI is. Because you have a track record, the network has a track record. You're basically saying, hey, I'm pre-buy all these. I'll give you cash later, but I'm guaranteeing you I can buy this amount. And whenever it doesn't fit that amount, when the network pushes you traffic and doesn't fit that CPI number, they basically give you a bunch of make goods to make up for that. And they take care of it on their end because they don't actually pay the sub-publisher that was pushing the poor traffic. And so the good part is that, you know, if you do know your metrics extremely well and you can work with a pretty sophisticated network, they can basically guarantee you what the CPIs are and make goods when it doesn't happen.
Okay. So we want to leave 5 or 10 minutes for some audience questions. I'm going to do a quick recap, but if anybody's got any questions, I don't know if there's someone with a microphone that we can, yeah, there we go. Feel free to come up and do some questions, but kind of a quick recap here. So we know fraud happens. We have to get tracking in place, right? So everybody out there, if you're running a mobile app, if you're spending money buying users, if you don't have tracking in place, you're in big trouble already. So that's step one. Gather the data, figure out what the data means, analyze the data, and be looking at it regularly, right? Another thing, don't prepay. I hear that from every guy out here, right? Don't prepay. Has that bitten any of you guys in the past? It has for me. I've had a problem. I'll admit that. So don't prepay and continue to monitor. Require that your data is at the sub-publisher level. Make sure you're able to track all the way down to that level, and you should be kind of setting yourself up for success that way. Yeah, any questions out there? Anybody? Bueller? No? Cool. Awesome. So we were oh, wait, I see one.
What percentage of fraud do you find on Facebook versus ad networks?
Ooh. Did you guys hear that? What percentage of fraud do you see on Facebook versus ad networks?
Facebook is my benchmark right now for no fraud. I don't know if that's necessarily 100% true, but I'd say that from what the data that we see, they've got their own inventory, like Matan talked about. So having your own unique inventory when you control the ecosystem really takes a lot of the risk out of it. I think that where we see most of this fraud happening is in this tertiary level where you have sub-publishers